this wine that was fully formed in my head before I started making it was a benchland wine. I was looking to make Cabernet that was both powerful and elegant. Cabernet is going to be powerful. It doesn't matter how you grow it, how you pick it, what you do, it's going to be powerful. But for me, it's much more interesting at the intersection of elegance, and they almost sound like opposites, but they can be in the same glass at the same time. And that's what I've been chasing all my adult life.
At this point in your career, how do you see your future going? You got a long one ahead of you.
I do. So kind of just working my way up to learning everything I can, kind of just diving deep into everything I can learn on the vineyard side, as well as some of the business side of it too. I came from the science background, so I don't know a lot of the business side, so really going to be enjoying learning that as well.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for Perspectives, featuring Cathy Corison. Come on, man, what the fuck?
This wine that was fully formed in my head before I started making it was a benchland wine. I was looking to make Cabernet that was both powerful and elegant. Cabernet is going to be powerful. It doesn't matter how you grow it, how you pick it, what you do, it's going to be powerful. But for me, it's much more interesting at the intersection of elegance, and they almost sound like opposites, but they can be in the same glass at the same time. And that's what I've been chasing all my adult life.
At this point in your career, how do you see your future going? You got a long one ahead of you.
I do. So kind of just working my way up to learning everything I can, kind of just diving deep into everything I can learn on the vineyard side, as well as some of the business side of it too. I came from the science background, so I don't know a lot of the business side, so really going to be enjoying learning that as well.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for Perspectives, featuring Cathy Corison and Colleen FitzGerald. We're excited to have people watching across the U.S., Canada, even India. I'm Jeff Davis with the Napa Valley Wine Library Association. I also host a radio show called On the Wine Road. More info at onthewineroad.com. And that provided me the opportunity to interview tonight's guests previously. I met Cathy Corison about 3 years ago at Wine and Spirit Magazine's Top 100 event when she was chosen the top 100 winery in the world! Exclamation point. I asked Cathy how many of those she picked up, and she said, I think 3 or 4. So when you win so many accolades, it's hard to remember them all. More recently, I interviewed Colleen for my show focusing on Women's History Month back in March. And since we were talking about some of the female pioneers in the industry, I asked if there was a woman she admired whom she had yet to meet, and she mentioned Cathy Corison. So that led to all of us getting together tonight to gain perspective on the career of an established veteran through the eyes of a younger winemaker who has a bright future ahead of her. As you heard, Cathy is known for making Napa Valley Cabernets with power and elegance. Conversely, Colleen has been handed Pine Ridge Vineyards' Chenin Blanc+Viognier project, a distinctive, light, aromatic, flavorful wine. While overseeing the project, she created the sparkling wine version of that blend. That was the first label for Pine Ridge in 25 years. Okay, enough from me. Let's bring in Cathy and Colleen. Thank you, ladies, for joining us tonight.
Jeff was talking about what's kind of your favorite part of working with, or what was your favorite part of working with Shannon?
Well, first of all, making Chenin Blanc is the thing I miss most about not still being at Chappellet. Great world-class Cabernet vineyards. That was a treat as well, and it was a wonderful learning curve for me. But that Chenin Blanc was old vines. It was 25, 30-year-old vines. It was on terrace cliffs above the Chapellet's house. So it's been replanted to Cabernet, of course, by now. But Chenin Blanc makes truly world-class wine because it has incredible, juicy, natural acidity. And I mourn the fact that so much of it has been pulled out in the Napa Valley. The issue for Chappellet and for everybody is that it was hard to charge much for a bottle of it compared to Cabernet. So eventually, after my time, it was changed over to Cabernet. But I love making that wine. For me, the models were the beautiful dry Chenin Blancs of the Loire Valley. And in fact, I would break in new French oak barrels with the Chenin Blanc. I would ferment the Chenin Blanc in them first, and then the Chardonnay would be fermented in them. So it was actually partially barrel fermented, and then it was barrel aged. So it was a very serious wine. So I miss it.
Yeah, that does sound. I didn't realize that there was oak on that wine. Because Shannon does get, it has a lot of those like bright acidity characters, and sometimes a little bit of oak can go a little bit far. So that's kind of a little bit shocking to me that you put so much new oak not on your Chardonnay.
Well, there was a lot of it that did not leave stainless steel, so it was a very small percentage. But I think it was important, and there's also always a little bit of botrytis because those clusters are so tight and they break and juice inside. And if the weather's right, and that means hot and sunny, that's here. We would, in the best vintages, we got significant botrytis, and we made a dry wine, so it wasn't a dessert wine at all, but it added further complexity.
Yeah, that definitely adds a little bit of those honey characters too. Because one of the other things I love is just you get a savory character from it as well, like kind of a ginger, honey, and and kind of how that balances with all of the fruit and the floral characters as well. Yeah. Well, that's super interesting. You mentioned that it's the old vine, unfortunately, has been replanted with Cabernet. And back in the 70s, there used to be so much Chenin Blanc, and now it's all Cabernet. Do you kind of wish there was still some Chenin Blanc here?
Absolutely. I like I said, I really miss making it. It was a treat. And that's not the only variety that's been pushed aside here in the valley for Cabernet. Yeah. I do believe we can make Cabernet as well or better than any place in the world, but it's still, I hate to lose the diversity.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And so then now you make a dry Gewürztraminer up in Anderson Valley. So why did you kind of choose Gewürztraminer and the Anderson Valley?
Well, I'm kind of goofing around. I only make 150 cases. It's almost home winemaking scale. It's ridiculously small, but it's really fun as a Cabernet house to have a totally dry white wine for reception, for wine dinners, first courses, and then personally, I love the wines of Alsace, and my Gewürztraminer is informed by the wines of Alsace, and it's totally dry, and I would say built like an Alsatian wine. So it's just fun.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I do have to say I went out and bought a bottle. I had a bottle a couple of years ago, and then I went out and I was like, I'm going to go buy a bottle. And I just, I opened it up with my roommate, and we both just sat around, and I thought it was really delicious because it wasn't, it had those floral characters that Gewürz can have, but it wasn't like so over the top. Like sometimes, you can just have these, like, it's just a bouquet. Like you feel like you're, chomping on a rose petal. And this was a very, like, it had the nice floral characters. It has the nice acidity. And it was just like a really enjoyable wine to have.
Thank you. Yeah. Fun to make, fun to drink.
Yes. Yeah. Do you put any oak on that?
No. That's
okay. So that's all.
And it's aged surly. It goes dry in tank, and then it ages on the leaves, and we just bottled it. And we're using a really good bottling line these days that we're not seeing really any bottle shock. So we'll be selling it any minute.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Do you kind of, what's your lees stirring? Do you stir the lees, or you just age them on the lees?
Just age them on the lees.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So then obviously we work and live in the Napa Valley, and you make some delicious wines at Chappellet before, and then also now your own wines. And you've had experience out in Pritchard Hill with Cabernet. And what kind of made you choose the Rutherford bench as like I've heard you talk about it before, about how how special an area it is. So like, what makes that area so special?
Well, this wine was fully formed in my head before, and it's just a wine that needed to get out. And I was making wine at Chappellet, some of the best Cabernet vineyards in the world. But mountain vineyards are very different than benchland vineyards. And I was chasing that power and elegance thing. Down here on the bench, which is just our jargon for the alluvial fans, down here, quite a few things are different. The natural acidity is quite a bit higher, and the wines tend to be very aromatic, and they have the whole range of Cabernet flavors, all the way from red to blue to purple to black, sort of cherries to blueberries to plums to cassis to blackberries. And if you grow them right and you pick them right, all those flavors can be in the same glass at the same time. So amazing complexity. And I love that bright red and blue end of the spectrum. If Cabernet gets too ripe or riper, everybody has different ideas. But for me, if it gets too ripe, it loses that bright red and blue end of the spectrum. So I spend a lot of time in the vineyards managing the canopy to get full ripeness at lower sugars. I also want to make wines that have moderate alcohol and grace the table and have a long, interesting life. So that's just where I needed to go to get the grapes. I can't make the wine any better than the grapes that come in the door. So the Cabernet is built in a way that would make the wine that I had in mind.
Yeah. Does that cause you to do a couple different picks and get so that you can kind of blend all of those flavors together? Or are you finding that you can get that in the same grape?
No, in fact, it's really important to me. It's all about canopy management, and then it's split second timing on picking, because I could get the same numbers by picking underripe and overripe, and you get the right numbers, but you don't get the right flavors. So I'm looking for uniformity out in the vineyard. We always go through it, veraison, and drop any laggards to allow us to pick the grapes as uniformly ripe as possible. So no, I don't do separate picks. I hope to pick a block where, every year Mother Nature throws us something different. And every year that balance point is a little different. And that's the definition of a great vintage, is when all the things you want converge at the right time. So we do everything we can to make that happen, and then do our best.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Being out in the vineyards and being there when the grape, and seeing the grapes every day, tasting, doing all of that, numbers get us so far. But I feel like with Cabernet especially, you really don't know that peak ripe moment until you're out there tasting it.
Yeah, and we're looking at so many factors, including and most importantly, really the status of the vines, because in our climate we can shrivel up to any old sugar we want, but that's not ripeness. We need to have those vines working and actually producing all the flavors. And another key thing for me on the Rutherford bench is it's the hottest part of the valley here. It's a bit of a misconception that it's hotter in Calistoga. Day in and day out, it's actually hotter in St. Helena. During a heat spike, like right now, I think it's probably hotter in Calistoga. But what that, I think, does for us, I'd always noticed that the tannins that come out of the vineyards just feel like velvet. The wines I make have a lot of tannin. If you were to measure the tannin, you'd get a big number. But all the tannins feel like velvet. And I've come to believe that that's because we're getting the seeds fully lignified. They turn woody and cordons off the nasty phenolics, I think. And then we're really getting the skin phenolics.
Yeah. What's kind of your, like, when you're tasting a grape out in the vineyard, what's your favorite, or like, what's kind of the moment that you go, yeah, I want to pick now?
It's almost impossible to describe, but it pops. The flavors pop. We're watching the acidity to be sure it's good. We're watching the sugar because I've never de-alcoholized a wine in my life, and they're all under 14%. So I care what the sugar is. So we're watching the numbers, but then tasting, walking. And then all of a sudden the flavors just turn this corner and pop. It's like they're bigger somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Because I imagine, yeah, you do have to be out there every day tasting that to see that pop that you're talking about. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So
if it gets hot,
yeah, especially when it gets hot, because they definitely they can turn quite quickly as well.
Ladies, I have some timely questions here, so I thought I'd jump in real quick and ask these for you. Rod wanted to know, Cathy, what you were just talking about a moment ago. What was the inspiration for that mindset about the wine that needed to be made?
Okay. I fell in love with wine when I was 19 years old. I was studying biology at Pomona College, and on a whim, I took a wine appreciation class. Wine grabbed me and ran with me. But it was a European-centric. It makes sense. It was back in the mid-'70s. It was Eurocentric wines. And so I cut my teeth on European wines. And I still drink a lot of European wines. But I love wine. I love the wines of the world. So what I'm looking for in all the wines I love, regardless of whether it's a Mosel or a Côte Rôtie or a Barolo, the wines I love have a life force, and it has to do with the natural acidity. But you can't get grapes overripe and then add the acid back. It doesn't. The life doesn't come back with it. So anyway, it was basically I wanted the wines to speak of place. I wanted them to be aromatic. I wanted them to have good, snappy natural acidity. And that's where I knew I had to go to get these grapes, because I had made wine in the valley for a long time for other people. And I had a pretty good sense of what Cabernet did in different places. And in fact, the Rutherford Bench, which is what we used to call the whole area between, say, Oakville and St. Helena, before there were AVAs, the Rutherford Bench was making world-class Cabernet-based wines that were winning expositions in Europe in the late 19th century. So there's a long, long history of great Cabernet grown in this little corner of the world.
Rod also wanted to know if you could explain what lignified seeds?
Lignified. Lignin is wood. The seeds turn from soft and green and very bitter. If you were to chew on them, very bitter and astringent. And then when the grapes are ripe and they've lignified, they're woody. They're literally brown and woody. And in fact, several years ago, I realized when I was deciding when to pick that, and I eat a lot of grapes in that process, I realized at some point that it sounded different on my teeth when I ate ripe grapes because the seeds were lignified. And sure enough, they're in the baggie, you crush them and you get the numbers on them and you look and the seeds are brown now. They're woody.
Like chewing on a toothpick in a sense, where you get that strange sensation?
I wouldn't say there's any flavor associated. I think what it does is it protects the wine from the really harsh phenolics, the bitter and astringent, nasty astringent things in the seed.
Let me ask one more. Earlier, Susan wanted to know early on. She said years ago she heard you say Napa Cab didn't need to be blended with other varieties, but can stand alone. Still so?
Well, mine do. I've called myself a Cabernet chauvinist. I believe in this little corner of the world. And that's not to say that other blending varieties don't do really well in other places, and even here. But Cabernet on the Rutherford Bench can do anything that those other varieties can do better, in my opinion. My wines are very floral and aromatic, and people will swear there must be Cabernet Franc in them, but there is not. That all comes from Rutherford Bench Cabernet Sauvignon.
Okay, I'm going to bow out again and let you ladies continue on with the conversation.
Yeah, so kind of to continue that, you've made such that you've talked about making this European wine style. And, the Napa Valley, like we all know, there was, it's kind of the styles changed a little bit where everybody wants to make these overripe flesh, adding the acid back, and so how did you know, or how did you keep with that style that that you wanted to make
that?
I think it's just stubbornness. I make what I like, and we're really, really small. We only make 3,000 cases. We're tiny. So we were fortunate to always have people that enjoyed it. But it was hard. It was very hard for a while when, fashion comes and fashion goes. It's the same in wine as in anything else. And so there's a pendulum swings. And my job is, I believe, is to let those vineyards speak. And I chose those vineyards because of these stylistic notions I had. But it's my job to let those vineyards do what at least I think they do best. So
yeah, that takes so much confidence to just say, like, this is my vision and I'm going to keep with this vision and I'm not going to let anybody tell me to do something else.
If I'm being fully honest, there were times that it made it very hard for my business, frankly, to not be stylish.
Yeah. I can imagine that. That sounds, it sounds really hard. Much like, if going back to one of I think your first harvest, you back in 77, you actually turned down I was reading about this, and actually from Jeff's podcast, I learned about this. You were turned down from working to harvest at Freemark Abbey. And then the next harvest, you went back and you worked for them. And kind of how did that all go down?
Well, those were the days when I finally did work a harvest in 1978 in the cellar. There had not been a woman in a wine cellar ever before. And that year there was another woman at Inglenook. I had bottled with her all summer. So there had not been women in cellars, period. So I knew Larry Langben, the winemaker, a little bit because he came through Davis just before I did. And he wanted to hire me. He's not the one that he did hire me and then had to take the job away. So the next year he came to me and wanted me to come in, and I did happily, gladly. I was very excited about it because we all have these fancy technical degrees from enology schools, but that doesn't teach you how to make wine really, and it certainly doesn't teach you how to run a cellar. And I think I already knew that I would be staying at the small end of the spectrum winery wise, and so it was really important part of my education. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that was my first winemaking job. The next year, 1979, I was the winemaker up at a little tiny winery on Spring Mountain called Yverdon. It's long defunct now, but
wow.
Anyway,
yeah. Well, that's amazing, because I was thinking about that in this age, if somebody turned me down for being a woman, I'd be like, well, I'm going to go someplace else. But I also imagine, that we're talking about a different time where there's also not the plethora of wineries there are now that you could just move from place to place. And that was definitely here, like a building part.
Yeah. When I got here in June of 1975, there were 30 wineries, 30. Wow. Now there are 500-ish, depending on how you call the winery. But
yeah, that's crazy. That's right. Awesome.
There weren't many options. You're right. Yeah. That was. They hired an intern every year from Davis, and I really wanted that internship. So
yeah. So what? I guess so. One thing I wanted to ask was if you could give yourself a piece of advice today that you would have given yourself back then. Like what would you have told yourself?
I don't think it was much different than what I did. I would say to anybody in any field, and the wine business is a crazy business. So first of all, you've got to be passionate. That's probably true of any field. You've got to be a little crazy because this is a very difficult, risky, crazy business. And if those two things are in place, then just start walking. Sometimes people overthink, especially kids coming out of school. They overthink things. They feel like they have to make the perfect decision when really life is just, you start walking and then there'll be a fork in the road and then you decide which way to go. And then there'll be another fork in the road. So it's really hard to know where you're going to wind up, but you won't get anywhere if you don't start walking.
Yeah.
So I kind of knew that, but that's the advice I would give to anybody today is don't take no for an answer and just start walking.
Yeah, well, that definitely seems like how you got into working that harvest at Freemark Abbey. Is you just kept walking. The fork took you one way, and then it took you back.
And I weighed about 90 pounds in those days. I looked like a 12-year-old boy.
I imagine you've had some varietals you've walked away from, and Meredith Hayes wanted to know if you mentioned playing with Gewürztraminer, and are there any other varietals that you haven't really played with that you would like to?
I love wine. I love the wines of the world. There are things I'd love to play with. Garnacha would be one of them, or Grenache. Riesling, I would love. But I also have always felt like it's really important to focus. And so I've tried very hard. We're basically a Cabernet house, and my letterhead says Corison, Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. And I think in order for me to wrap me around it, I need to focus. So yeah, in another life, in another place, there are lots of things I would love to make.
I saw that it took about 12 years before you got your own winery, and which is actually not too long. Was that maybe after you went on your own, and then it took 12 years to get your own winery?
Yeah.
What would you say to Colleen about how long it might take or what to expect? And of course, nowadays with the cost of things being so outrageous, she may not have her own winery for a while, but of course she can have her own.
Times are very different. I got out of school. The wine industry in the Napa Valley had been very active in the late 19th century, and between phylloxera and 2 world wars and a depression, by the time that was all over, the wine business was completely wiped out. And it wasn't until the mid-60s, about 1965, that it started to reemerge. And so I had the amazing good fortune to get here 10 years later. And there weren't enough little old winemakers to go around. So there was a lot of opportunity for all of us, regardless of gender, coming out of school. Napa Valley was poor. It was literally poor when I first got here. So I'd have to say things are just so different. It's hard to guess. But I would say that California is a very diverse place, both climate and soils wise. So, I think there's huge opportunity out there for young people. It might not be here in the Napa Valley because, frankly, even as established as Corison Winery is, if I still relied solely on purchased grapes, I could be knocked out of business 34 years later, because Cabernet prices they've taken a little bit of correction now, but they had just shot the moon. And if I had to purchase all my grapes at those prices, I'm not sure I could stay in business right now. We've had the great fortune to slowly buy some vineyard right here on the bench between Rutherford and St. Helena. So we're protected from that somewhat. But I think that's the biggest concern here in the valley is if land prices get so high that it's not commercially viable, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because when you think about, spending, I think a lot of people coming to the valley, they're like, I want to spend $200 on a bottle of wine, but, and that's, one of the extreme, or, not all the extremes, but I mean, that's kind of what you have to do now with how much everything costs, between barrels, grapes, labor has gotten really expensive and in all of that.
It's very expensive to make wine here at a high level. And so I don't know, again, there's just different forks in the road, depending on what you want. I didn't know that I would have a winery when I started my project, actually. I made the first 13 vintages custom in other people's facilities. It was back when the industry was expanding explosively and wineries were being built all over, and many had not grown into their capacity. So there was excess capacity that I could basically rent. And I did all the work, but I used other people's equipment and other people's facility. And when I started doing that, I figured I would be doing that forever. So
Yeah.
That's another option.
It's got to be so rewarding to make wines the way you want to make wines. And, and like you can fight for, when you're, wanting to make a wine and you can just make the wine that you want to make, and you don't have to like convince somebody else, like, this is going to do well. Like, I want to make this wine. This is my vision. So that must be so great.
It is wonderful. And I think there's no question I can make better wine in my own facility as well, because you're never going to be the first priority in someone else's facility. And so if there's not a tank ready when you need to pick your grapes, that's just too bad. Mm-hmm. We designed the winery knowing exactly what we needed to pick. And I do a little custom work, but I never do so much custom work that I jeopardize either of our ability to do what we need to do when we need to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, because then you wouldn't be able to pick those grapes when they pop with the flavor.
Yeah, and we talked about, persisting in making an unstylish wine. I don't think I could have done that if I were a hired gun. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have that choice to be stupid. Stubborn.
Yeah, you were kind of talking about like different wine areas, like, so because it would be awesome, I think, to have my own brand. But is that one of the reasons that you chose? Do you own that land in the Mendocino? There you grow the Gewurz, or do you buy those grapes?
We buy those grapes. Yeah, and it's only 2.5 tons. I mean, it's really really small. That's it.
Yeah. And so is that one of the reasons why you moved up that moved into the Mendocino area to get the Gewürztraminer?
Well, I got a line on these grapes. It was an old vineyard. It was the first vineyard ever planted up there. So it's old vines too. And like I said, I love Alsatian wines. And it just sounded like fun. And then I liked the wine. So I've been doing it since 99, so more than 20 years. So I don't know.
Speaking about working with other varietals and such, Colleen, you're already working with the Chenin Blanc+Viognier program, but it must have been really exciting for you when you brought on the sparkling version of that wine.
That was really exciting because, Chenin Blanc has a long history with making cremants out in the Loire. So, there's it's, I think, it's the third largest champagne, or the third largest sparkling base grape in the world. And so being able to bring that here, it creates this really nice acidity to it, and then we added a little pop of Viognier at the end just for a lot of floral characters. But it's been really fun project to start. It's still super new. I'm still learning a bunch about how to make sparkling wine, because it's a whole nother ball game. It's way more complicated.
It's a lot harder to do than to make Cabernet.
Yeah.
Cathy gets to go up to Mendocino. Colleen, you get to go over to Clarksburg to work on the Chenin Blanc, to work with the vines over there.
I do. So all the Shannon is grown in the Delta, which I think is a great area for, a great area for Chenin Blanc. The Delta, kind of, we were talking about the old vine Shannon, the clusters are huge. And so the Delta has this very maritime influence. And so the way that the winds kind of blow through the Delta and kind of there's still botrytis pressure and disease pressure to, and we pick ours also in a very fresh style because we want that natural acidity in the wine to carry it through. But the wind influence just kind of helps it keep very cool throughout even though it's hot during the day, and those big canopies, so that you're getting that the airflow, and you're not getting a bunch of botrytis and other kind of diseases coming through it. Yeah.
We have a woman who lives just 10 minutes from Clarksburg who's watching tonight's Perspectives.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
Changing the topic just a little bit, Lucia wanted to know, Cathy, if you'd be willing to talk about your succession planning.
Well, it's interesting. You should ask. We are of a certain age, and I have 2 daughters, and of course, I've always hoped they would take over. But I also knew that if they knew how much I wanted that would probably not happen. So they're in their 20s, 24 and 27, and they've graduated from college, and they were both in New York City when COVID hit, getting their lives started. And the younger studied acting at Syracuse University, has a BFA in acting, and the elder has an engineering degree from Harvey Mudd in Claremont. But then she was in New York City studying pre-professional dance for the 3 years leading up to COVID. They both came home March of 2020, and they're still here. They're both finished bottling for the second year, and they both worked harvest last year. And we had actually started talking about succession the summer before, the summer of 2019. My husband asked them, they came through on vacations separately, and he asked each of them if they might see themselves coming into the business sometime in the next 10 years. And much to our delight and almost surprise, they both said yes. So we had already in January of 2020, right before COVID, we were in New York City meeting with them and starting to talk about succession. And in fact, my elder daughter was going to be shadowing me last harvest. It wound up being chaotic because of the fires, and it was just, so it didn't work quite the way it was supposed to, but they're still here. Grace, the younger, is working 2 days in the tasting room. They both are getting involved in the bookkeeping and accounting. They both help in the cellar. So I don't know. I think maybe 10 years is sort of somewhere between now and 10 years is really the horizon. But it's so exciting to know that they're interested. And so.
That is very. Is one of them have more of an apt to the sales side or the vineyard side or production? Like, do they kind of separated that out, or are they both kind of like, we want to be a part of everything?
Right now, there's a little bit of that, but I think my actor is going to be really good at sales and marketing, and she already is. And my more serious engineer, dancer, I know is very interested in the vineyards, but in a way, I think their job right now is to learn as much as they can, and then it's really going to be up to them how they sort it. Because no matter what happens, whether they want it or not, it's going to be theirs to deal with. So anyway, so right now we're just having fun, really having them learn as much as they can, and it's really nice. They were gone long enough, they're old enough that it's also really a lot of fun. We're all getting along really well, and it feels good.
The question I have is, if neither of them want to be the winemaker, who's going to carry on your style?
Well, I expect that one of them will want to be the winemaker, but there are a lot of ways to slice up this pie. I mean, I'm not a terribly good salesperson, so I have a sales manager. I didn't until about 5 years ago, and I did it all, and I didn't do it very well. So this little tiny business is a big subject, and so they're going to need to hire something out. So that would be one possibility, that they would run it and hire a winemaker. Maybe they'd be in the vineyard, but they would hire a winemaker. Stylistically, I think it would just take time for everybody to really understand what that means. Because I do believe that a house needs to stand for something. A label needs to stand for something. So I think that stylistic continuity will be important, but I think that's not that difficult with these. It's partly driven by the vineyards. It's largely about vineyards.
Yeah. Since you're talking about family, why don't you tell us about your husband, William, who was such an integral part of your success?
Well, we got married. There he is. We got married 5 years into my project. So in 1992, and he has been key. In fact, there would be no Corison Winery without William Martin today. Among many other things, he designed the beautiful winery, and he remodeled that old 1898 farmhouse. He found the palm trees, they're rescue palms. So anyway, this is just too big a subject. Winemaking is only one of the components. There are many, many other extremely important things that have to fall in line. So anyway, he's the best forklift driver I've ever met. He's our IT department. He does the accounting. He keeps everything running. Of course, harvest, it's all hands on deck. Bottling, all hands on deck. So he's also been key in identifying and procuring the vineyards we've bought, and that's like I mentioned earlier, is extremely important to being able to keep doing what we do. So yeah, it's Mon.
You're talking about the benchland earlier, and why don't you explain why the Kronos Vineyard was so important to you and what it means to you?
I believe it's one of the great Cabernet vineyards of the world, and it's partly because it's turning 50 years old this year. It grows on St. George rootstock, which is completely resistant to phylloxera and fell through the cracks when everybody was replanting all their vineyards to AXR1, which made great wine, but it turns out it was not sufficiently resistant to phylloxera. And so the entire North Coast had to be replanted in the 1990s. Kronos Vineyard just fell through the cracks. It's on St. George. St. George has its issues. It's 50 years old this year. It's ridiculously low yields. It's a 25-year average of 1.25 tenths of the acre. I don't know too many people that would put up with that. But I so value the wines that those gnarly old ladies make. So,
yeah, that sounds awesome. I mean, those are some incredible vines to work with. Yeah, and and a lot of people would not harvest 1.25 tons of the acre. Be like, oh, that's way too expensive. We can't do that anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense because we can't charge enough for the bottle to make up that difference.
Yeah,
I could replant that vineyard with everything modern and get 3 to 5 tenths of the acre and still make world-class wine. So I mentioned the crazy part a little while ago. You got to get a little crazy.
Yeah. Well, it's obviously a way that you keep with your style. So yeah. One question that kind of really interests me that I was thinking about when I was preparing for this was if you could stop Napa Valley in any time frame, like if you can think about it in any way, like style, women in the wine industry, growth of the wine industry, kind of like what was happening. Would there be like a point in time that you think would be a great stopping point, like to forever keep the Napa Valley that way?
Well, I don't know if we can do that.
I know.
When I think about this question, though, because it's changed hugely, I mentioned how poor the Napa Valley was. When I got here, grape growing was comprised of pruning and picking. That's all anybody did. Most of the wines went to the cooperative, which is now Hall Winery. And so it was a completely different world. And funding was a problem. So there's, over time, there's been more money available to make great wine, and that's been important. But I believe it all comes back to farming. As long as we're all farmers first, the Napa Valley is going to be fine. So I'm sort of dodging the question, but that's my concern is that we can't make great wine without great grapes, and great grapes don't grow themselves.
They definitely don't.
Colleen, Rod wanted to know, and I know you feel passionate about your Chenin Blanc+Viognier project, but he wanted to know if you were to start your own passion project, what style of wine would you want it to be?
Oh, that's a hard question. I do kind of like the aromatic whites. I like drinking them, but they were kind of my intro into winemaking. I think, Jeff, I was telling you when we spoke not that long ago that I never wanted to make a sparkling wine, but it's been a super interesting project to start to learn. So it'd be awesome to try different things with that. You
told me you like Pinot Noir too.
I do like Pinot Noir. I don't know if I want Pinot Noir is kind of finicky, and I don't know if I want to make it. I've never made it though either, so it's also that could be interesting. I don't know. I think it'd be super interesting to plant different things around the valley, or plant different things and work with different varietals. Like I went up and traveled in Spain and tasted a lot of Albareños, and those were great wines. And so it's really interesting to be able to taste different things. So I guess I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that.
I think that's a good answer. I've been wanting to see more Albarino planted around here.
Yeah.
I hear that wine.
Yeah.
Here's a picture of Colleen's Chenin Blanc+Viognier bottle.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Also, I'll go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, the harvest is almost around the corner again. I can't believe, we're already seeing fruit set, and and all the grapes are starting to get a little bit bigger. Cathy, what's one of like the favorite things that you love about harvest? Because I think for a winemaker, like you have to be crazy, because like in that way that you said that you have to be crazy, you also have to love harvest because you're working. You're spending so much time with it.
We only get one chance a year to make wine, and we wait all year. And it's just my very favorite time of the year. It's energizing. You can drive up and down the valley on the highway and feel the energy in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I wait all year.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it's like restorative, because you get to, like you're spending the rest of the year selling the wine and bottling the wine, and and taking care of it and doing all of those things, and you get to blend, and it's artistic. But like harvest is really the time that you fall in love with, especially getting into winemaking. I always tell anybody that's looking at it, like if you don't do a harvest, tons of people need somebody to work harvest, and if you love it, go for it. And if you don't, then move along, because if you don't love harvest, you're not going to love winemaking.
Yeah, it's the only time of year that I get a chance to really dive into, and I'm on the crew. The rest of the year, I drive a desk way too much. So yeah, it's the best.
Yeah. How do you kind of feel like this harvest season, besides this heat wave that we seem to be having, how do you feel like the season's going so far?
Well, all we know so far is that we have 30% of normal rainfall, and that's going to affect everything. It's already affecting the canopies. They're not filling in. They're not as big as they might be. But grapevines are smart. They know. And I noticed that the set isn't terrific either. And I think they just know that they're balancing the amount of fruit that they're going to need to ripen. And so that's what we're going to be watching, really, is to be sure that the canopies can handle the fruit that they're being asked to ripen. So I don't expect a big harvest, but in my experience, it's the weather between around the 1st of August and picking, which is veraison is right around the 1st of August, when the grapes turn from hard and green and photosynthesizing like a leaf. All of a sudden they turn soft and turn color and start to accumulate sugar, flavor, and lose natural acidity. That's the ripening season. And for me, it's the weather from then until picking that determines the quality of the grapes. So we really don't know until then. But we do know that I think crops are going to be on the small side.
Yeah. You said something that I was going to ask a question about. Now I can't remember what it was. Oh, but yeah, or I guess I was going to say that, kind of talking about the stress of the water, like I always talk about Cabernet having a little bit of stress is good. And, and kind of to your point, the vines know, not to create, like they're stressed out a little, like they're stressed out from like being able to look for nutrients, but they know not to do anything crazy this year.
Yeah. So that's interesting to watch. In the back of my mind, I think we may need to drop some crop, but I don't know yet. We'll know. The vines will tell us.
Yeah.
On this topic, Tina wanted to know, Cathy, what else are you looking for in the vineyards that helps you determine a pick?
Well, in the vineyard, I've been there all season, so I'm looking for balance in the way the vines grow, versus the way they fruit. It's a balance between the two. And then just as important that is managing the canopy so that the right amount of air and light gets into the fruit. Too much and they get sunburnt, too little and they don't develop flavors and everything the way we want. When I'm on the ground and I'm sampling, I'm as much looking at the status of the vines as I am anything else, because if the vines aren't still healthy and working, they're not ripening the fruit. So it's a really critical time. They're tired by then, and it's really important that they stay, a little bit of stress is good, but losing all your leaves is bad. So
Changing the topic a bit, let's start with you, Cathy, or Colleen, since you deal with white wines. Jess wanted to know, what are your favorite food pairings with the wine that you make?
One of my favorite food pairings with the Chenin Blanc+Viognier is a spicy Indian curry. I think a little bit of spice with kind of the sweetness and the acidity of Chenin Blanc, or that blend specifically, goes really well. I also like doing a ceviche, seafood, but I think the spicy, the spice is something a little bit spicy pairs really nicely. Do you have a favorite for your Cabernet, Cathy, or your Gewürztraminer?
Well, the Gewürz is wonderful with smoked salmon. It's really good. And the Cabernets, especially when they're young, lamb made any way except hot and spicy, because hot spiciness does not play well with tannin. But lamb anyway, but hot and spicy is made in heaven with young Cabernet.
Yeah. I love the kind of the little gaminess of lamb with nice Cabernet.
Yeah.
Those flavors definitely play off of each other.
You basically wanted to match the sort of the assertiveness and the weight of the food and the wine. And young Cabernet is assertive, and so you need to serve it with something that can stand up to those pretty strong flavors.
Yeah.
I have to admit, it was a nice surprise, Cathy, when I came over to interview you, and I was treated like most of your guests. They handed me Gewürztraminer right off the bat, and although it was only 9:30 in the morning, but
breakfast of champions.
Crisp wine right off the bat, and you're so used to Sauvignon Blanc in Napa Valley, and the Gewürzt was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, again, it's just fun to make, fun to drink, and it's just not another Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's more interesting to me.
Yeah. Well, we're getting near the end of an hour here. We kind of touched upon this earlier, but let's see where that question go. I think it was Rod wanted to know if are there any key pieces of advice, Cathy, that you would like to offer Colleen that you didn't take along the way that she might benefit from?
Sounds like she's got it wired to me. She's doing just fine. Stay the course, and know where you're know where you're headed, and point yourself in that direction.
We were talking about the amount of the winemaking element for women is growing, but still very few executive positions. And I asked Colleen, do you see yourself maybe going in that direction someday? And then she kind of touched upon it in that interview piece I featured at the beginning of this program. But yeah, Colleen seems like she might keep going and climbing that ladder.
Yeah.
You never know. It is
a lot of different ladders,
Yeah. When you start climbing the ladder, much like Cathy said, you start sitting more at a desk. But it's been really fun for me. I've been really trying to learn some of the sales stuff and understanding what the sales side goes through and what as winemakers, because I feel like that sometimes there's a gap that we don't understand what each other's doing. And so then when we get, I hate to say the word mad, but when we don't understand what's going on for the other person, it's hard to work together to make this great product that you can sell, and also that we can make, and that we like to make. And so it's been really interesting for me to learn that.
Yeah, and that sales have been a huge learning curve for me. It's not, but it's something as a little tiny family winery I've had to do, but it's not really my proclivity, and I'm not terribly good at it. But if I can't sell it this year, I can't make it next year. Is why it's important to me.
Yeah.
I've talked to a number of winemakers who have gotten to that top position where they are at a desk, and after a while, they really lament that fact and position, and they want to get back out into down to the cellar and back out to the vineyard.
That's where I'm happy.
Yeah, you hear that a lot. Yeah. Anything else that you two would like to ask each other, or do you think we've kind of run the course and it's been very interesting? Very nice.
Yeah.
It's just learning about your trajectory, and I'm so excited to see so many women in the business. It makes me very happy.
Yeah, I thank you, Cathy, so much for taking the time to talk to me too, because I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Yeah, see you at Wine Tech
next year.
I have a feeling you two will be seeing each other quite a bit in the future.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for joining us tonight. I do appreciate that. And we at the Napa Valley Wine Library certainly appreciate your participation.
Our pleasure.
Thank you so much.
I want to let people know that keep your eyes open for our other StreamYard broadcasts that are coming up. We'll be featuring the Napa Valley Wine Library's Visual Oral History Project very soon. And Michaela Rodino, speaking of female executives, will be joining me for that project. And also, TK Mondavi is celebrating their 75th year this year. So we'll be having a conversation, another Perspectives event with Mark Mondavi and Angelina, the third and fourth generations of the Mondavis. And that's coming up in August. And we've got a few other things planned for you as well. So keep your eyes open, and we'll keep you abreast of what's happening. In the meantime, stay well and continue to enjoy the Napa Valley wine and all the region has to offer. And on behalf of the Napa Valley Wine Library Association, thank you for joining us. I'm Jeff Davis. Cheers.